When I was a child, I lived at my grandmother's house. The heat was unbearable, and I had no choice but to hide from the sun at her place. By today's standards, it would probably be called a slum. From east to west were long, narrow alleys, barely wide enough for 3 people to pass at once. Each alley housed over a dozen families, and the whole area was made up of cramped, single-story homes. Of course, my grandmother's house was the same. She had 6 daughters, so the attic was carved up into even smaller spaces to make more rooms. I remember my youngest uncle used to stay up there while studying for his graduation exams. It was damp, stifling, and smelled of mildew. Even in late autumn, just standing up there for a moment would leave you drenched in sweat. Most of the houses were self-built. Though they were old and worn, they were fairly sturdy. But they were poorly lit, so dark inside that even in broad daylight, you couldn't see your fingers in front of your face. Still, for people around there, it was better than living under thatched roofs. Each alley had 1 or 2 openings at either end, like a giant net or a patch of farmland covering trenches. The kids in the neighborhood, regardless of age, were all raised wild. In spring we played marbles, in summer we tossed cards, in fall it was spinning tops, and in winter we had snowball fights. Of course, that kind of layout was perfect for one particular game, hide and seek. And whenever I think of hide and seek, I think of little Nick. Nick and his mother weren't locals. They moved into the house right next to my grandmother's after the previous family relocated. His mother was a thin, pale woman who always looked frail. No matter the season, spring, summer, fall, or winter, she wore the same faded floral blouse and a pair of thin brown slacks. Every day, she held a handful of grain and called to the chickens she raised, chickens even skinnier than she was. She never liked talking to the neighbors, but she made a living by weaving and selling simple bamboo goods, brooms, rice sifters, conical hats, and the like. There was always an unnameable pain etched on her face, like someone suffering from an illness they couldn't speak of, or like a child constantly bracing for punishment. Her skin was the color of husked rice, and her dry, bluish lips made her face unpleasant to look at. Every time she saw her son return home, her eyes flickered with a fear and revulsion she couldn't hide, in stark contrast to her gentle and caring actions. Her voice was always low and muffled, as if filtered through gauze, or echoing up from underground. In the heat, it sounded like the rasp of a dying cicada. Although this woman didn't enjoy socializing, you could often hear her talking to her son. Most of the time, it was just her voice. You rarely heard the boy respond. That was probably because Nick was usually out playing during the day, and only at night would the two of them talk together. A few times, I woke up needing to pee and heard voices coming from their house, so I crept under their window to eavesdrop. But their conversations were strange, so strange I couldn't really understand them. "Leave me alone. What more do you want from me? How long are you planning to stay with me? Aren't you done yet?" Things like that. And Nick would only ever respond with one word. No. I was fascinated by the odd pair, but back then, adults always thought kids were too nosy. Even if I told my grandma or my mom about it, the most I'd get was a playful swat on the behind and a scolding said half in jest, before they went right back to whatever they were doing. Kids around 5 or 6 are nothing but a bundle of question marks, curious about everything, so naturally, I started paying more attention to Nick. The area where my grandmother lived had once been forest land. Over 100 years ago, near the end of the Qing dynasty, a few fishermen had settled here, and over time, it became known as the Fang family settlement. No one really knew why it was called that, it was just something passed down from earlier generations. There were always tons of kids running around, from age 5 to maybe 9 or 10. Nick had a large head, and his features were oddly flat, like someone had smoothed out every bump and curve. From a distance, his face looked like a red balloon that had been blown up and had eyes and a mouth carefully painted on. His scalp was dotted with a few slick, wet strands of hair, and his pale, almost bleached skin was so thin you could see every purple vein beneath it, like drinking straws. His eyes were small, and his sparse lashes made them look like two black beans pressed into a mound of flour. He always squinted when he spoke. His nose was low, wide, and short, with a slight inward dip at the bottom. According to the rules, the one who got caught was supposed to be it next. But Nick didn't like hiding, and we were happy to let him keep being the seeker. Still, the fun faded quickly. When one kid kept winning over and over, the game just stopped being fun. Eventually, when Nick excitedly invited everyone to play again, he was met with side eyes and silence. The group would quickly disperse, leaving only me standing beside him. Nick would squint at their retreating backs without saying a word. "Why do you always find us?" I asked him once as we walked home together. "You guys are too dumb." "I've hidden in all those places myself a million times," he answered, as blunt as ever. I was used to it. "Is there any way to hide so that the seeker can never find you?" I asked again, just as Nick was about to open his wooden door. This time, he didn't answer right away. His hand stopped on the door, then dropped back to his side. He walked over to me with a grin, held out both hands, and gently placed his thumbs over my eyes. "Blind them, like this. Press hard with your thumbs, blind them." "What a weirdo," I muttered, rolling over in bed. For some reason, the night felt especially hot. Normally the night breeze was cool and soothing, but now it was weak and stifling. My lower body tensed, I had to pee. I crawled off my bamboo bed, still rubbing my aching eyes, and headed out. As I mentioned before, the alleys in the Fong family settlement were narrow. In the summer, the heat turned every house into a steamer basket. Everyone dragged their bamboo mats and beds outside to sleep in the open air. My grandmother's house was near the entrance of the alley. No one had a private bathroom, adults had to walk over 100 meters to use the public toilets. As for the kids, we all just used the drainage ditches nearby. I got off the bed and saw that the moon was already up. Because the alley was cluttered with furniture, I carefully stepped around the piles of stuff and suddenly noticed the neighbors sleeping outside. I hadn't paid much attention before, maybe my eyes were a little sore that day, so I glanced around unnaturally. From where I stood, looking down the alley, there were people lying outside every house. No one moved at all, like piles of merchandise stacked together without any clear boundary. The silver moonlight filtered through the gaps in the worn plastic tents, shining on their bare muscles, giving off a strange reflection. I'd seen a plastic mannequin factory nearby once, one of those places that made dummies for clothing stores. That day, they were unloading goods, and a strong wind was blowing. Rows of naked mannequins lay scattered on the open ground, just like now. I was still a kid then, and I remember being startled, unable to tell if the things lying there were real people or not. But after I finished peeing, I noticed that only Nick's house didn't have anyone sleeping outside. And ever since they moved in, no matter how hot it got, he and his mother never once slept outdoors. They always finished dinner and went inside early, closing the door tight. I was about to walk over and take a closer look when suddenly the wooden door creaked open. A figure hunched through the gap, then straightened up and quietly shut the door behind them. I crouched beside a bamboo rack to get a better look. It was Nick's mother. Her profile was turned toward me, and she had an uncontrollable expression of excitement and relief on her face, like a prisoner just released from jail, or a gambler waiting anxiously for the result of a game. In her hand, she carried a small cloth bag, the same one she had with her when she and Nick first moved in. She seemed uneasy and turned back to glance into the house once more, then carefully made her way through the bodies lying in the alley. It wasn't easy. She hesitated a little, and ultimately chose to walk through the alley on my side. Then he slipped back into the house. I was a little frightened, the heat from earlier completely gone. Goosebumps rose on my arms, and I climbed back into bed. The next morning, I was getting ready to wash up and have breakfast when my family woke me up, only to see Nick sitting on a stool, while his mother handed him a bowl of noodles topped with a fried egg. Nick looked smug as he took the bowl. I could see the noodles were clearly steaming hot, but he didn't mind at all. he slurped them down without pause, barely chewing, and within moments the bowl was empty. Nick's mother didn't seem surprised. She just took the empty bowl with a look of resentment and bit her lip. Nick, on the other hand, darted outside like lightning. Before he left, he told me to hurry up and eat so we could go play. The events of the night before felt surreal to me. Maybe it was just a dream, something that never really happened. That was how I comforted myself. A few days passed. The summer heat finally started to fade, and my stay at my grandmother's was coming to an end. By my count, I'd be leaving tomorrow. When Nick heard I was going, he just said, "Oh," and then invited everyone to play hide and seek again. The neighborhood kids only played with him when there was absolutely nothing else to do. Of course, the result was always the same. Nick was the seeker, and he never missed a single person. That whole afternoon, he caught every one of us. As usual, I ended up walking home with him amidst the grumbling of the other kids. After dinner, everyone went to bed early. In the middle of the night, the wind suddenly turned cold and sharp, like blades slicing through skin. I fumbled around for my blanket with my eyes closed but couldn't find it. Instead, I touched something round and fleshy. When I opened my eyes, I saw Nick crouching beside my bed. My hand was resting on his head. He stared at me, nostrils flaring. Naturally, I screamed, but he quickly clamped his hand over my mouth. "Come with me," he said, then turned and walked out. Strangely, I actually followed him, as if under a spell. The bustling street from the daytime was now deserted. Back then, there were no late-night bars or internet cafes. Even televisions were luxuries few people could afford. At this hour, aside from night watchmen, there wasn't a soul in sight. Our footsteps echoed on the still warm asphalt. Nick walked ahead at a steady pace. I don't know how long we walked, but we passed the Fong family school, the grain depot, and the free market store. "Where are you even going?" I couldn't help but ask. "To find someone. She wants to play hide and seek with me," he replied without turning around. "Who?" I muttered, but this time Nick didn't answer. He just chuckled a few times. His shoulders shook with laughter, causing the fat at the back of his neck to bunch up. I don't know how long we walked. I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, when I bumped into Nick from behind. He had stopped. "She should have known there's no escape," Nick said suddenly. I was stunned, until I realized he wasn't speaking to me. He was talking to someone curled up beside a closed-down corner store. "I'll follow you for the rest of your life," Nick said. This was a junction where the main road met the residential alley. There was no one else around. "I have to try," the person stood up suddenly, clutching a bundle of clothes. So it was Nick's mother. "You're leaving tomorrow, right?" Nick suddenly turned to me, smiling faintly. I nodded blankly. "You're the only one who's ever been kind to me here." Nick suddenly reached out his hand, like an elder trying to pat a child on the head. "What are you trying to do now?" the woman shrieked suddenly. Her voice was sharp, like fingernails scraping a chalkboard. Nick's hand froze midair. I didn't know why, but I instinctively felt he was extremely dangerous in that moment. I ran to the woman's side. She pushed me behind her protectively. "I'm sick of this body," Nick murmured, holding his head in both hands. "Why do you always play hide and seek with me? I already told you, you can't win. No matter where you hide, I'll always find you." Nick cupped his hands in a cage-like gesture and moved toward us. I could clearly feel the woman trembling. "Go on, hide. Then I'll come find you again. I told you already, my favorite game is finding people who hide from me." Nick grinned broadly as he walked closer. "Run. Don't let him find us," the woman shouted, pulling me as we ran down the empty street. When I looked back, Nick was still standing in the same place, unmoving, just reaching his hand out toward us. We ran from place to place, but each time, before we could even catch our breath, Nick would slowly emerge from the darkness. "I've come to find you again," he said. "Run! Run! Hide again," the woman shrieked like someone possessed and the first. "No way," Nick's voice came out strained and high-pitched, like a broken water valve. "If I blind him, he won't be able to find us anymore." I didn't know why, but those words suddenly came to me, and before I realized it, I said them out loud. The woman seemed to understand immediately. She raised her thumb and pressed it into Nick's eye socket. A stream of blood shot from his eye, spraying all over her. But Nick didn't seem to feel any pain. He just kept smiling, not resisting at all. After a moment, he finally went limp on the ground. With the last of her strength, the woman dragged me forward, still running, still cursing as she went. I looked back. Nick was lying still on the ground. Eventually, the woman and I, "Where are you going?" I asked, watching her hobble off with a strange stiffness in her posture. "None of your business," she snapped, twisting her neck awkwardly. "Why does it feel like my hair's being pulled?" That's when I noticed a pale, chubby hand, veined with green like brittle leaves, reaching out from behind her neck. I looked up. A heavy-set Nick was perched on her back, grinning grotesquely. One hand was yanking her hair, the other pressed to his lips, signaling me to be quiet. But something felt wrong. Nick's face had no wounds. Yet just moments ago, the woman's hand was still bleeding. The woman didn't seem to notice anything. She kept walking down the street. After just a few steps, she rolled her neck again. "No matter where you go, I can find you," came a whisper, Nick's voice, right by my ear. I didn't go home. I sat there until dawn. My legs had gone weak. When I finally made it back, I was scolded. My grandma and mom were terrified. Luckily, I was unharmed, so the matter was dropped. Not long after, the police came to our neighborhood with a wanted poster. They were looking for Nick's mother, or rather, that woman. Who was that woman, really? I asked my mother. She was a child trafficker, my mom said angrily. She used to abduct little kids, your age, and take them to the countryside to sell. One time, the driver fell asleep at the wheel, and the van crashed into a river. All the children drowned. Their bodies weren't found for days. When they were pulled out, their heads were swollen like steamed buns. The veins on their skulls bulged out. There were over 10 kids, lips purple, eyes crushed shut by swollen foreheads, their whole bodies soaked and pale like pickled radishes. That day, the police came and told everyone what had happened. Only then did we realize what a monster that woman was. She had a child of her own, yet she did something so cruel. But they never caught her. Nick wasn't her real son, I murmured. My mom looked puzzled, but added, "Whatever." The police said she tricked another kid right before she was exposed. Always kept him close. Probably wanted to raise him as her own. Maybe she couldn't have more kids after all the terrible things she did, she snapped. Then she went off to do her chores. Later, when I visited my grandma again, there was someone new living in that house. The woman had vanished. Sometimes the neighbors would gossip. Someone claimed they saw a thin woman in another town with a big-headed boy. But no one ever caught them.